Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 comedy biopic and bit of whacked out weirdness that is Wired. Now, before we get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this infamous flop, I would like to give a special shout out to Vontae for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Wired is a film that has this reputation of being like the worst biopic of all time. After seeing it a couple times, I respectfully disagree. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a good movie or a good biopic. It's not. It's not any of those things. But I do feel that there are other biopics that were made for television or released to a slew of theaters that are worse than Wired. And the reason for that is because I feel that this has some extra merits that those other films do not. But I do feel that this is easily one of the most offensive biopics. I agree with that consensus wholeheartedly. Now, it's directed by Larry Peerce. And prior to this film, he did a handful of other films, including stuff like Hard to Hold with Rick Springfield. But after this movie, he was done. He was blacklisted by the industry. He never directed another film again. And I think that punishment is a bit harsh considering the circumstances. He's not really to blame for this film's failure or the issues that this film has. He shot what he was given, which was an unbelievably flawed and wild and inane and insane screenplay that was, in my opinion, unfilmable. So he did the best he could to film the unfilmable. And there are some moments where he actually does showcase some skill. There's a sequence near the end when John is in his deathbed, and there's a great shot of the camera that is pointing downward from the ceiling. I think it's a really good looking shot. And there's other moments that are very surreal and very chilling when it comes to John uh, uh, doing drugs, or a nightmare scene where he goes to a bathroom and the soap dispenser is full of cocaine, and the paper towel dispenser has nothing but syringes, and the direction is great in that scene because it's very wonky and surreal, and the camera angles are at different sort of uh perspectives and different parts of the screen, and you have different sort of pans and POV stuff, and to really showcase how surreal and nightmarish that particular sequence is. And there are a few other moments that are a little bit more serious, like some of the scenes where like Bob Woodward is interrogating the woman who Kathy Smith, who shot up John Belushi and ultimately was responsible for giving him the fatal dose of drugs. That's actually a pretty well shot, well done sequence. But there's only so much you can do with stuff like the guardian angel bits and any scene involving Gary Groomes as Dan Aykroyd, or the low rent knockoff SNL scenes. I mean, he couldn't shoot at the studio that SNL was shot at because Lorne Michaels wouldn't allow him or anyone involved with the production to step 1 foot into the studio. So you couldn't do that. And so there's a certain lack of authenticity there. And on top of that, he couldn't shoot scenes that were actually on the show. So he had to shoot scenes that he had no prior reference to. So he just had to basically make things up on the fly and improvise as a director, and that's hard. And I don't think he was a good enough director, period, to be able to do that kind of stuff. It kind of just put him in a bad spot. So I think those are the moments where he definitely falls flat on his face because it's not really his forte as a director or as a filmmaker. But then again, he's not given a good script to work with. He's not given good skits or these high energy sort of comedic moments. He's given really bad material and really bad skits. So they don't look good and they are bad, but they're bad, period. I don't care who's directing those skits, they would still suck. They would still not provide any laughs because of how they're written. But he does a good job with the musical numbers. I think he injects a decent amount of energy into those, like the King Bee number at the beginning, the Blues Brothers stuff, even the Joe Cocker song at the end. So I think he's good with the musical numbers. I think he's good with the surreal aspects of the film. He's good with the more serious stuff. I even like the scene with John and his wife at the beach. I felt that was shot well, and that had a good amount of charm and heart to it. So I think there are moments where his direction actually clicks and actually works for what he's given to work with, which isn't much at all. So yeah, I'm not going to sit here and defend him and say that he did a great job and he directed the hell out of the movie, but I think he did an all right job. He did a decent enough job, and I don't think he deserved to get completely blacklisted from the industry just because he directed this movie. His direction wasn't that bad. It wasn't bad enough for him to never direct again. I've seen directors who have done considerably worse jobs that kept getting work. Now, the screenplay, on the other hand, by Earl Mac Rauch, oh my god, this is one of the most unbelievable, epic fails of a script that I can think of. But it's an ambitious failure that in some ways I kind of appreciate. It doesn't work, but I appreciate the risk. I appreciate the fact that Earl tried to turn the traditional biopic on its head. He tried to do something that no other writer has done when it comes to the biopic. He took the project, which was already a really rough project that had honestly zero chance of success because of what it was adapting, which was Bob Woodward's novel and expose Wired. So he took that and was like, yeah, a lot of this is just very heavily focused on John Belushi and his drug use. And it's very one sided and it's very sensationalist. I'm going to lean hard into that because it's really the only path I can take. I can't really go any other direction if this is all that I can work from. And it actually leads to some moments that work, like the nightmare sequences or some of the more chilling, cold scenes involving John Belushi and his stark and serious drug abuse. But in other ways, when you try to combine John Belushi's comedy and or SNL type skits with moments like John Belushi's corpse being operated on uh, at an autopsy table, complete with a laugh track, then it's going too far. So I appreciate the fact that Earl took chances and took risks with this and wasn't trying to make a traditional biopic, which is why it's interesting. It's an interesting watch because of the fact that there's a lot of moments in this that you can't even remotely see coming at all. Like it's wild and unpredictable half the time because there are so many things that happen and so many just questionable decisions when it comes to the story. And honestly, what little there is of the story that is just mind blowing. It really is. The tonal inconsistencies of this screenplay are tremendous. And it is just crazy. And it leads to the film being truly terrible. Because of the fact that this script is just so tonally inconsistent. Also, the fact that there really isn't much of a cohesive story at all. You start out with John Belushi singing "I'm the King Bee" with the Killer Bees on SNL in the 70s. That's the opening shot of the movie. That's how the film opens up. It's not a bad opening. It's actually a pretty good recreation of King Bee, even though that actually didn't happen on SNL, but it looks somewhat authentic and it's a decent way to start things out. And then it just completely craters after that. Because now you get to John Belushi being dead. He's found dead of an overdose. He's sent to the coroner's office. His corpse wakes up out of the coroner's a bag, the body bag, eats a donut, and burps. That's actually how you were first introduced to John Belushi in this movie. And then after that, it just gets even more surreal and weird. Now there's a guardian angel named Angel who is driving around John Belushi in a cab, and he's talking about how much John Belushi sucks and is a drug addict. John Belushi is calling the guy a spick. This doesn't paint John Belushi in a good light at all. And it starts out that way. You don't see John at his brightest. You don't see John when it comes to the moments of charm and him being loving towards his wife or towards his friends. You don't see that early on. You don't see that until like 20 minutes in the movie when there's a nice scene with him and his wife, but it's like 5 minutes or less out of the entire story. So much of the story is way too one-sided and way too much like a TMZ level hit piece on John Belushi. Oh, you were talented, you were funny, but you did drugs and you screwed up and you ruined your life and you ruined everything. And you're an asshole. Like that's basically the kind of message you get when it comes to the story. You don't really get to know who John Belushi is. You don't really get to know about his origins, where he came from, what he stands for. So much of this script is just John Belushi did drugs. John Belushi is a drug addict. John Belushi is a flawed person. John Belushi was talented, but he was flawed and he killed himself with drugs. And you're like, yeah, that is part of John Belushi's life, but there's so much more to his life and to his legacy than that. And it's almost like Earl it's almost like he deliberately was trying to be as extreme as possible. Because you have the stuff where okay, John's corpse wakes up out of the body bag, eats a donut, burps, has the scenes with his guardian angel, and he's not looking good. He calls him a spick. Our guardian angel is calling him a drug addict and a loser. And they're trying to do this It's a Wonderful Life. Well, not really It's a Wonderful Life. They're trying to do like a Christmas Carol sort of thing or Scrooge, but with John Belushi and this guardian angel, but it doesn't work as well. They're trying to go into the past and have him interact with moments in his life. But a lot of that is just very flawed in terms of the way that it's presented and the way that it's structured when it comes to the writing. Doesn't really feel like there's a lot of morality or lessons that are learned. And we also don't really stay in those moments for long enough for them to really resonate in any genuine capacity. You have stuff with John's wife, but there's a lot of stuff with her talking to Bob Woodward and what is supposed to be like this investigation aspect of the story. And it's like investigating John's death and trying to pin down exactly what happened and solve the mystery, so to speak. Even though there really is no mystery, he died of an overdose. He died of a drug overdose. There's really no mystery here. So I don't know why the film is trying to focus on that so much. It's like one part a Christmas Carol Scrooge thing with John Belushi's ghost and his guardian angel was trying to teach him morals and lessons. Another part, investigation, journalism type story with Bob Woodward as an actual character in the movie, investigating the death of John Belushi. And then another part is trying to be a biopic that has like random moments like, oh, here's John Belushi in 1972 when he's trying to get started as a comedian and his teacher is like telling him to make people laugh until it hurts. And you're like, okay, it's different. The intensity in that scene is interesting, and it definitely does make you understand why John is such an intense comedian when it comes to his energy and his vibe and everything that he brought to the stage and into the screen. But it's just like a burst of insane energy for like 2 minutes, and then it's never really mentioned again, and it's never really uh, 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 expanded upon. And there's so many moments like that, and there's just a ton of random skits that have no connection to anything. They don't connect to the themes, except for maybe the drug skit with Groucho Marx. But other than that, like they don't really connect to anything. They just are there because oh, it's John Belushi. It's the John Belushi movie, so we need to have skits because he was in SNL. But because of the fact that SNL themselves did not give permission for the writer or for this production to use any actual SNL skits to reenact for this film, they weren't really able to work with those. So they just have to basically come up with their own skits, and they suck and they're not funny and they are distracting and they feel like the epitome of padding when it comes to the overall script and the story. And even the way it ends is just random and disconnected from reality because now it's like Bob Woodward, he goes to the scene of the crime, which is a hotel where John overdosed. And now it's like he's interviewing John Belushi while he's dying. Like somehow he's been able to time travel to the past, and now he's interviewing John while he's on his deathbed, and he's grilling him. And it's honestly pretty disrespectful. But then again, I mean, this is the same script that has a scene where John Belushi is on an autopsy table, and this Asian coroner surgeon is cutting him up with a laugh track, and he's doing the whole samurai stuff, and there's a laugh track while he cuts him up while he's still awake and screaming, and even like hands him his own heart. So that's actually something that happens in this script. One hand, I kind of admire Earl Rouch's balls and his tenacity. On the other hand, he's got to know when to hold back a little bit because this was one step too far. And so was the stuff with Bob Woodward at the end, grilling the dying John Belushi, trying to do this whole morality play, basically. Like, oh, John, why'd you do it? Why'd you shoot yourself up with the drugs? Why'd you do the drugs, John? What's wrong with you? Why'd you kill yourself, John? And it's just like having Bob Woodward be this sort of heroic figure was insulting because he really was a guy who was just using John Belushi for fame and for fortune. He was basically a tabloid journalist. If you read Wired, that's really what it is. It might as well have been written by the National Enquirer. And even the stuff with Angel and Belushi, the whole guardian angel stuff, like that doesn't work either. That's something different in terms of trying to frame things. But like I said, they don't connect together well enough when it comes to the scenes where he's going to visit his past, like when he was a part of this band called the Ravens. Uh, they don't really do anything with that. They don't really do much with his stuff when he first starts in SNL. They don't really do much when it comes to when he's having a film career. You just have a lot of scenes of him just being mean and being nasty and just being a piece of shit, really. Like, and there's even like a scene where his corpse is literally in a trash bag while it's being flown to the funeral. That actually is a moment in this story, in this script. Like John Belushi's corpse is put into a trash bag, it's strapped into a seatbelt on the plane. So there's a lot of stuff in this script that is just so unbelievably tone deaf that it just leaves you speechless. So I could totally understand why critics at the time and why a lot of people nowadays consider Wired to be like one of the worst biopics, and I can see why they consider it to be one of the most offensive ones, because it just is so crass when it comes to the way that it's approaching John's life and his legacy. And one of the worst things you can do as well when it comes to a movie about John Belushi is make a script that isn't funny. There really wasn't any laughs. There's no laughs to be found unless you're laughing out of cringe or laughing because you're so uncomfortable or you can't believe what you're seeing. Am I really seeing John's corpse in a trash bag on an airplane? Am I seriously watching this right now? Did I really hear John's last words be, breathe for me, Woodward? Did I actually see that? I did. Wow. That must have been one of the moments that was written by Bob Woodward for this script, right? Had to have been. It's just such a bizarre, bad script. But like I said, I appreciate some aspects of it. I like the surreal nature of it. I think there are some moments when it comes to the serious nature of John's drug abuse and the way his friends were reacting to it and the way they tried to get him on the right path that is tragic and somewhat compelling, but they don't focus on that enough in terms of how other people are reacting to it and how other people are dealing with it, and also the way that everything is set up structurally is so all over the place that it's hard to really get into things in terms of the story and how things unfold. And then also there's too much of John being a miserable drug addict. There's not enough of him being fun. There's not enough of him being charming or charismatic. There's not enough scenes of him with his wife in a better light. There's not enough scenes with him and his friend Dan where the two of them are interacting with one another and having a good time and having these good moments that the two of them shared with one another. There's not enough of that brotherly dynamic that they had, because in a lot of ways Dan viewed John as his brother. He really did. I mean, Dan had brothers, but he viewed John as much of a brother as any of them, and they were inseparable and they were really really close with one another. And the dynamic you get between Dan and John in this is that they're friends, but they're not like inseparable. You never really got that vibe because you don't see enough scenes with them together. And the scenes that you do have, other than the scene where they're driving around and they're in Las Vegas, a lot of them are just, oh, what song would you like to listen to when you're dead? So like those scenes are just depressing. So there's just so much about this that is just too bleak, too depressing, and too raw. I think the rawness is something that I think should be in a John Belushi film, but it shouldn't be the main focus. The rawness of things, the real uh, uh, reality of drug use and its effect on John and how it was powering him through performances. It's another thing they just completely missed out on. Like that was a big part of it. He did all these drugs and everything because that's what enabled him to be as energetic as he was on stage. That enabled him to let loose as much as he did. And he felt like he couldn't maintain that energy and be that boisterous, loud, brash, uh, confident, and charismatic personality without the drugs. Talk about the drama of that and that inner battle and inner turmoil that he's dealing with. I can't be that guy unless I'm on drugs. They don't go there though. They're just like, he just takes drugs and he does too much. And they don't even tap into the failure of Neighbors and how that led to him going back to drugs because he felt like he was hopeless. He wasn't the same guy anymore that people loved because he was sober when he did that movie. And so we felt like, oh, well, because I was sober, that bombed. Because I was sober and I didn't have that coked up energy that people expect from me. There's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of things that are not even touched upon or are barely touched upon when it comes to the screenplay. So it's it's not a good biopic script at all. It's not really a good script in general. That's what happens when you hire the guy who did Buckaroo Banzai to write your biopic about John Belushi. This is what you get. You get a weird script that doesn't make a whole lot of sense and feels like it belongs in a completely different genre. Now, the cast, considering what they were working with, which was a pretty poor script, a good chunk of them actually do some good work. Michael Chiklis in particular, I thought he was fantastic. I thought he did a great job playing John Belushi. I bought that he was John Belushi. And I hated that he was stuck in this bad movie, stuck with this really subpar script that didn't make a whole lot of sense and really put him in a lot of bad spots. But man, did he still act the hell out of his performance in this as John. Like, he got the mannerisms right, he got the energy right, he got the vocal inflection right. Like, I bought it. Somewhere along the line in some alternate universe, there's a version of this film that got Chiklis wide critical acclaim. But that's not what happened with this version of this movie, because all that happened was it essentially killed his career for a couple years until he was able to get TV roles like The Commish. But I mean, man, was he great in this? It was so good. It was one of the main reasons why I don't hate this movie, is because Chiklis is so good in the film as John Belushi. He's also a main reason why I recommend this film. People should watch this movie at least once, and it should not be forgotten about entirely, despite its reputation, because of Chiklis and what he does here. Ray Sharkey, on the other hand, is Angel. Pretty bad. He's not funny. He's annoying. His character comes across like a raging asshole and a total prick, which is fitting because that honestly is Ray Sharkey in reality. And if the rumors are actually true that he was the one that introduced drugs to John, which led to him overdosing later, that's another reason why this is an incredibly insensitive film. How in the hell did you not know about that? Like, maybe ask around, maybe figure out certain things so you don't cast that guy to play John's guardian angel. Like, dear God, that is so bad. JT Walsh, I thought he did a good job as Bob Woodward. Not a great character, not a great guy, but JT Walsh did a good job playing the character, delivering the lines. I don't think he deserved to get fired from Loose Cannons by Dan Aykroyd because he was in this movie. But Dan, he hated this film with a passion. He tried to put a curse on it. Seriously, he tried to put well, I don't think he tried. I think he did. He wound up putting a witch's curse on this movie. That's how much he hated this film. I can't blame him because it does not paint his friend in a fair light at all. And it also doesn't paint himself in a good light. I mean, Gary Groomes as Dan Aykroyd. Wow. What a pathetic performance. He didn't look at all like Dan Aykroyd. He looked more like Kevin Nealon. And his performance was not even average. Like he just did a really piss poor, pale imitation of Dan Aykroyd. Like he at times he like barely had the voice. It's like they didn't spend any time at all casting him. That's really what it seemed like. Lucinda Jenney as Judy Belushi. I didn't mind her. I thought she did a pretty decent job with a role that was fairly limited in terms of what she was given when it comes to the script. But I liked the moments between her and Michael Chiklis. I bought that the two were a couple. Patti D'Arbanville, who played Kathy Smith, she was really good. Another performer in this cast that deserves recognition, who played the junkie who ultimately shot up John with the fatal amount of drugs. You also have like Alex Rocco, who plays Arnie Fromson, who's like a producer. He was fine. I want to mention J.C. Quinn. That's the other actor I want to mention who played John's comedy coach when he's screaming at him, getting him to, make him laugh till it hurts. Like, I felt that guy did a really amazing job with a really limited and just not really that great role because it was just a one note role. He was just an angry comedy coach. But like he sold it. He went all out. Like he really gave it everything that he had. And I felt he definitely stood out because of that. And in a good way. Now, technique wise, cinematography by Tony Imi, it's it's very meh. Same thing goes for the editing by Eric A. Sears. It features a score by Basil Polidorus, which is definitely one of the strangest and one of the more forgettable scores of his career. This is a couple years after RoboCop. And this score it sounds weird. It definitely fits the intense, cold scenes when John is shooting up or the scenes involving him doing drugs, but it doesn't fit when it comes to other lighter moments in the movie. It's just very bizarre. No, it's another bizarre aspect of a really bizarre movie. And pacing wise, not the best. It's like 113 minutes, but it drags throughout because it really doesn't have enough to be a compelling story or engage the audience with any amount of consistency because the story's all over the place. It can't find a tone to stick with. It's not funny, so it doesn't work as a comedy. It doesn't work as a biopic because you barely really follow John's life with any sort of authenticity. And there are some surreal moments that are kind of effective, but they're effective in the way that like an episode of Tales from the Dark Side is. Like if you want to see a biopic about John Belushi that's from the perspective of an episode of Tales from the Dark Side, then watch Wired. That's really the best way to sum it up. It's almost like a lot of elements of this would have worked better if it was just an anthology of a show or an episode of an anthology series like Tales from the Dark Side or Tales from the Crypt or The Twilight Zone, it's not really John Belushi. It's some guy who's inspired by John Belushi, who died of a drug overdose, and he's being shown the error of his ways by his guardian angel. And it's very bleak and intense in its tone, and it's trying to be a moral message about why you shouldn't do drugs, why you shouldn't throw your life away and your career away, and whatever promise you have away through drugs. It would have been much more effective that way because it would have been a hell of a lot shorter, and it wouldn't have been as insensitive because it would have just been it's inspired by John Belushi, but it's not actually supposed to be John Belushi. But since it actually is supposed to be John Belushi, it's insensitive as hell. But that's just my thoughts on Wired. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.